Hi folks, Noah Hallett here, and I wanted to take a minute today to talk in some detail about ADA compliance, and that is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a U.S. law that really focuses on accessibility for people with various different disabilities, and one of the biggest places where it comes up is going to be in online tools. So websites, especially public websites, have to follow certain requirements based on things like minimum readability scores, making sure that anything with video has captions, and making sure that everything is accessible and navigable by keyboard and not just with a mouse. And a lot of these things are kind of quality of life tools that are really important to have anyway, just to expand your customer base, just to make sure it's approachable. And most website and online building tools already have these built in. Now, I don't want to take a ton of time to explain ADA compliance because there already are a couple sites that have done a really good job explaining this. Right off the bat here, Danielle Ability does a really good job breaking out the ADA. Functional Lawyer here does a great job covering the legal elements of it. And Notion Design Group does a really good job kind of talking about some general details about why it's important. Most of them actually focus on it from a commercial perspective. And one important thing to note is that the Americans with Disabilities Act technically only applies to government entities. So, government websites, city websites, IRS sites, all of those have to follow these regulations. A lot of parts of Europe also have to follow these rules as well for websites based there. For the most part, private companies don't have to follow these rules, but it still is a good idea to keep ADA requirements in mind, just on the off chance they become a global standard, and also just because it's kind of the right thing to do, and is a very easy way to make your website more approachable. What I'm actually going to focus on is I'm going to talk about my personal experience, because I spent the last 5 years working with public school districts, working in building their websites and communication tools. And among other things, we did actually scan their websites for ADA compliance. So I'm going to look up a nearby school district and just kind of talk about this a little bit in detail. Now, I've touched on some of the key things that are really, really important to the ADA compliance laws. Again, most of them are already built into website tools. So looking at this right off the bat, you look at the text on the header. You've got a bright white text on a dark blue header, where it's really easy contrast ratio. Imagine that this text was, light green or kind of just a fainter blue instead. That would then very quickly get much more difficult to read. And so that's one of the key things, one of the key accessibility pieces. See also, we're seeing a scrolling slideshow of photos right now. Most of those photos have text on them, and there's a video. Let's see if that has captions. And it does. Okay. So right here I saw that it's got the YouTube tag in the bottom right, and it's got a closed captions option, which is perfect. Okay. So that's great. So that is one of the things a lot of school sites do. Let me see, how do I get out of this? There it is. Ooh, that's a little tricky. One of the things that school sites do to get around those kind of requirements, and this is coming from the perspective of a website builder, building a video tool that automatically generates captions is extremely hard and fairly slow. And so tools like YouTube that already have that is incredibly useful to be able to use that, so you don't have to rebuild the tool from scratch. So that's why you see a lot less raw video content on public websites, is just because they have to have those closed captions, and that's a challenge. But also we're seeing individual photos, and those photos often have text on them. Another big part of ADA compliance is going to be that any text that's in a picture, now it's just a picture, I can't highlight individual words, I can't click on individual things here to spell it out. So a screen reader, if somebody's visually impaired comes to this site and they have something mousing over text and reading the text to them, it will not pick up text on a picture. And so that's something definitely to watch out for, and one of the single biggest things that can get public sites in trouble, especially school districts, because it's a really easy way to convey information. You put up a flyer that says, canned food drive next week, here are the details. It's really tempting to put that up in a picture, but that one hits those legal requirements, and two can get you in trouble just if any of your audience isn't able to read that. So you have to make sure that that text, any text in a picture, is either on the, let me refresh this and see if I can get that scrolling again, is either in the alt text, the text description of that image, or is provided in text somewhere else so it's accessible. So those are kind of the two most important things that come up a lot. To talk a little bit more about what happens, say your website doesn't meet basic requirements of ADA. no one's necessarily going to see or know that. The way this works is most of the time, the only way the Office of Civil Rights will actually review your website and check this and find the errors is if someone reports the website. So whether it's a disabled student or a parent of a disabled student, community member, then they will report the website to the Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights will then review it, and if there are any issues, they'll reach out to the owner of the website, and they will go through what's called an OCR audit, or an Office of Civil Rights audit. Now, right off the bat, I want to be really clear about that. OCR audits are not bad. One of the really big things is they just sound scary. But really what it is the Office of Civil Rights will reach out. They'll set up an intro meeting with you to introduce themselves, usually with 1 to 3 contacts from OCR, and they'll break down what the issues are, what they've seen, and kind of talk through easy ways to fix them. So they're very conversational, they're very laid back, they're not high stress. They'll give you a timeline, usually perfectly reasonable, break down exactly what these issues are and what they've found, and then they'll just work with you to fix them. So there's nothing to be afraid of with these. The only reason you'll ever get in trouble with this is if there are repeated complaints, if the issues they call out are not resolved, or if for whatever reason you give them trouble. Like if they say, hey, can you fix this? And you say, no, go away. That'll get you in trouble. But as long as both sides make a good faith effort to have a conversation and go through it, there's nothing wrong with these. And I can say that, again, I did this for the past 5 years, but then also I did, working with several school districts over the last 2 years, I was the point contact for 3 individual OCR audits where there was an issue. We talked with the Office of Civil Rights and got it resolved. And I volunteered to do that on behalf of the school district because they did not have the manpower to go ahead and go through it. And at the time, I was representing the website vendor, so it was perfectly easy to go through that. And those situations were not difficult, nothing really to be concerned about. It is really kind of a nice system that works fairly smoothly. And I wanted to make sure to mention that because one of the troubling things we saw there was we also saw that some of the vendors that provide review services for ADA compliance, both the software sites themselves can have scary advertisements telling you about how dangerous and what a problem it is and how difficult the OCR audits are, which is simply not true. And a lot of it is kind of an unfortunate rough sales pitch that then we had a lot of clients come to us scared. They were really scared of the possibility of an OCR audit. So that's a bummer. The other thing too is we would see law offices do that, trying to occasionally we would just see some law offices filing complaints against websites in the hopes of setting up a lawsuit. And that's something that always happens. It's a very small number, but it's enough that it makes more noise than the actual number of cases happening. So if anyone tries to scare you about ADA, talk to your website vendor, have a good conversation about it. Nothing to worry about. It is something to be aware of, to always keep an eye out for, make sure you're training your staff on, but not necessarily to be scared that this is going to come and get you. So just wanted that clear. And without further ado, I'm going to do an actual OCR audit of this website. So I have pulled up this website here. This is a free online tool, wave.webaim.org, and I'll link that in the conversation here in my actual video. This is a really, really cool tool. This does a terrific job of it's a free tool that we used a lot to double check websites, and it has the same foundational tools in it that the Office of Civil Rights, the OCR, uses to review websites for these requirements. So most of the backbone of all this stuff is built on this exact same tool. So all you do is you copy your web address, you pop it in here, click this arrow to go review it, and this will scan the website and give you a summary on the left. And this is really all there is to it. So when we were checking websites, this is a lot of what we would do. The screen on the right looks a little crazy, so you see a lot of information. Green, of course, is good. So that's saying that they're ARIA labels, saying there's a technical label for this text. I'm going to cover this a little bit, but don't get too intimidated by the tech speak of it. This is all fairly basic web design stuff that'll come up as you're doing the scan. These are all correctly marked as headers. This is correctly marked as what information it is. There is alt text on the links that says what the link reads. That's really good. So that's that screen reader navigation. So this is great. Looking at the review on the left, you've got different categories. The number one thing that you want to look out for is errors, and they have 0. Number 2 is going to be your contrast errors, and that's issues where there may be a problem with readability. Most of the time, and I think we're seeing these here, most of the time, I'll go ahead and say it's a little bit tricky to read that. Those are false flags. False errors. That's a poor choice of words. Most of the time, the contrast errors, if you actually look at it, they're not actual contrast errors. There's no real issue there. So like the About Us, the Enroll button, those are the ones showing as contrast errors as they wouldn't be readable, and they're really not. If we look at those individually, there's plenty of contrast for those to be visible on the site. And if we actually look back at the main website, we're looking at, where even are those? I think it might be these. And I don't see any contrast issues at all. The text is very readable. It all makes sense. Really nothing to be concerned about. So there's both doing the wave scan and then double checking the results, because the scanner will call out things and then you can double check to see the key ones if they're issues. ARIA tags and structural elements are actually good. You want those numbers to be high. Alerts are things that could be errors but need to be double checked. Don't see a ton of those. And if you click on these, it'll tell you, yeah, there we go. Okay. And so that's the kind of thing you can actually click on these and it'll tell you exactly what the issue is. Very low contrast between text and background, and that's a misread. I don't think that that's actually an issue. So, but these are the things you would take this scan, you would show it to your web developer, they would run through this and fix these as best they could. So that is basically it. None of the tools are super complex. There's no real challenge to going through this. And one thing I really wanted to emphasize is this rating system here, because this is exactly the same rating system that most other commercial scan systems. So Moncito is one that comes to mind, as a company that offers built-in ADA compliance checking. That is a good tool, but one thing that it is paid. There is a contract value for it, and it does tend to overemphasize things like alerts. So it'll tell you that the alerts are things that'll get you in trouble and freak you out a little bit, when really they're not things to be worried about at all. Now I bring that up specifically because I worked directly with Moncito and several clients that used Moncito, and there were more than a few times where they came to me very concerned, and it turned out that there was not an issue. But the way it was presented in Moncito did make it look a little bit scarier than it should be. And that's true of all of the tools that I've looked at. And so here's a little bit more information about each of these, about the structure. This is the good thing again. Order didn't even come up in the beginning there. Reference, didn't see any of that. Details, this shows the breakdown of all of those individual findings on every single one. So these are really good. This is a great scan. Good job, LRSD. You've got your ducks in a row. Good job. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to cover. But the number one thing I did want to cover as well is none of these automated scanners can detect if, so this is exactly why it's an issue. So say for example, this is not finding some of the issues here. So this, right here, there is just no possible, and I won't even worry about that right now. There's no possible way for that graphic, for all of that text in there. First of all, it's not readable because it's teeny tiny. Second of all, it is certainly not in the alt text description, because there's no way that information is in the description of this photo. That is the number one thing that still trips up school districts and can come up in an OCR audit. That calendar information cannot be posted visually that way. They could do this flyer over here, that's totally fine. But using screenshots like this legally presents a lot of text information that is visible in a picture and is not readable as alt text. So a screen reader would see that and say, picture, caption, 2023 or 2022-2023 calendar is available. You know, find it online, click here for the link. From a direct legal perspective, that is an ADA violation, and that's one of the things they would ask you to either remove that photo, more than likely, or find a way that all of that text could be in plain text, either in the text description or in the somewhere on the same screen where it could be read quickly. So that right there is a sterling example of something that is not picked up on the scanner, but could cause issues if it's ever reported to OCR. And again, they're very laid back audits, the non-issue. The biggest thing is that would waste the OCR office's time, because it's a relatively minor violation, but it's something to watch out for. One of the things that I came into a lot was you'd have a principal or a teacher somewhere on a website and they'd post a flyer, which is something that schools have done for decades, and there's nothing wrong with that. Except if they have a lot of text, you again have to make sure that text is accessible as plain text, either highlightable in the image somehow, or in the description, or in the body of like a news article. You just have to make sure that all of the text is accessible both in the image and as plain text. And there's no automatic scanner in the world yet that can tell if a picture can look at the picture and actually read out the text, which is why it's an issue. So that's something you have to keep an eye out for by hand, and that's something to watch for a lot. So that was it. I want to keep this relatively short, so we just ran through some of the basics of ADA. We ran through where to find the ADA scanner. We ran through what an ADA scan actually looks like, and then talked about one of the biggest key outstanding issues that can still trip people up even with that scanner. Hope this was helpful, and yeah, questions, comments, fire away.